All right, I think we are getting there. Pretty good attendance. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. I'll kick this off as one of the co-create seminars today. Welcome, first and foremost. I'll say just a couple of sentences on the co-create project itself, and then move over into the seminar format to give you an understanding what the seminars are intended for, and then introduce our three guest speakers for today. And then I'll be guiding us through the conversation for the remainder of our time here together. So first and foremost, the Co-Create project is a EU and UKRI funded 3-year project which is set up to explore conditions and governance aspects for solar radiation modification research. Most of you, if you've tuned in, are probably familiar with solar radiation modification as an issue. Nonetheless, the short version of it is it's a umbrella term for deliberate interventions in the climate system to counteract climate change, essentially to limit risks of climate change for people and planet. And right now, this is a very much theoretical set of technologies, if you will, that are being researched for getting a clear understanding of their risks and uncertain potentials to counteract climate change. And so that's the premise of the project is, again, to examine how research into this issue can be done well and what governance might be needed, given that there very understandably so, there are concerns around this technology as it could have pretty high impacts, both positive and negative, and that we clearly need to understand more about the uncertainties around it. So within the project, which, as I said, runs for 3 years and includes a consortium of 12 organizations across Europe who are working on this. Within the project, the seminar series is a place for discussion and deliberation on this complex issue, which clearly requires the engagement across many different perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences. And so this is a place for mutual learning, a learning journey that hopefully is for mutual benefit of us all who are engaging in it. So you'll see many of the consortium partners on this meeting, and many others, stakeholders, interested people who have perhaps signed up by following the stakeholder forum activities of the project or through other means. So you're all very welcome here, and we will get to an interactive discussion after the first round of remarks. So what is the context for this particular conversation on research funding? You can see from the title, From Principles to Practice and Back, that we're looking to connect the theoretical discussions on governance, governance principles. There are many out there that have been discussed and very carefully crafted and developed. And we'd like to connect that with the concrete lived experience of current research funders so that we can learn more about how these things actually might look like in different institutional settings. So we've invited 3 current funders of SRM research to help us explore these questions based on their experiences with various types of research and various approaches to research funding. And so one of the commonalities, I would say, of those 3 is that they have clearly demonstrated a commitment to serve public interests and not for-profit interests. And this is a particular aspect of recent developments, that there's also the possibility of for-profit activities, which frankly, within the Co-Create project, we've struggled how to address as a governance challenge. And so perhaps some of our conversation might also touch on that distinction. And yeah, so we're here to explore. And I'll have some prompting questions after the first remarks of the three speakers. So I'll move quickly to introduce them. In no particular order, we have Andy Parker from the Degrees Initiative, perhaps the longest standing funder with experience exceeding a decade in this issue. Then we have the Environmental Defense Fund, who has equally a long-standing experience in this field over a similar time span, in fact, and has which has more recently also stepped up again with a funding support to explore SRM impacts. And then third, last but not least, the UK's Advanced Research and Invention Agency, Mark Symes, with a dedicated funding program to advance evidence and explore feasibility, scalability, safety, and governance aspects. And sorry, I didn't mention EDF is represented by Lisa Dilling as well. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I'm actually not sure if one of you wants to volunteer going first. I'll leave it up to you if there's a preference. I know it's very early morning for Lisa in the US. So perhaps Mark, do you want to kick it off?
Sure, happy to. Thank you very much, Matthias. And nice to see some of you at least online. And thank you for turning out. So we were asked to speak a little bit about the why, what, and the how of how our organizations are operating in the SRM research space. So I'll just give you areas why, what, and how in no more than 5 minutes. So as to the why as we're funding SRM research, this goes all the way back to the climate trajectory that we're on and the increasing discourse that we're seeing around whether we research things that could cool us down on timescales faster than decarbonisation. And we're seeing this across the climate debate at the moment, the increasing intensity of discussion around SRM. What we're also seeing now, more recently in the SRM space, is the emergence of private actors. So people who we might think are looking to make money out of deployment of technology in the near term. But as we see it, we don't yet have a sufficient evidence base in order to make proper decisions on this. We simply don't know, in a lot of cases, if these techniques would work or what their impacts would be. And so the Exploring Climate Cooling program was stood up with the intention of finding out the feasibility, scalability, safety, and potential governability of various different approaches into SRM. So we're funding 22 different projects, and these cover a whole gamut of activities. They include computational modeling, they include desk studies on governance and ethics, they include climate monitoring studies, and in a small number of cases, 5 to be precise, we're also funding some small-scale controlled outdoor experiments on particular approaches to SRM. And we're doing that because we think that a firm evidence base on which governance decisions can be made relies on having that hard real-world evidence. And the analogy that we often draw is with the Montreal Protocol, where ozone-depleting substances were able to be phased out because policymakers had really robust evidence from the real world that those substances were depleting ozone, and because they also had robust evidence of alternatives that they could use in that case. And so if we have robust evidence, policymakers can make robust decisions based off them. So as I've mentioned, we're funding these 22 different projects. So just a couple of words on the how we're funding them. Firstly, we're trying to be as transparent and open as we can with this program. We acknowledge this is a contentious field and that it's also quite emotive. And so we're mandating that all the teams that we fund agree to a data and IP pledge, where they're going to make all the data that they collect open access. And they're also, if they take a patent out on anything that they discover through ARIA funding, they won't enforce that patent against others if they're using that IP for research purposes. So the aim here is to hold the research space open and to hold the science that we fund accountable. We also have a lot of governance measures and program principles that we're operating under. For example, we've made the commitment that we'll be transparent at the program level as well around what we're funding, and that we'll actively communicate with as many different audiences as we can. And this is especially important for those outdoor experiments where we've made public the various different frameworks that we operate through when we fund outdoor experiments, mandating caps on their size, their physical scale, the types of materials that they can use, and also mandating how they go about engaging with the communities near where those experiments take place. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of the Area Exploring Climate Cooling Programme. I encourage you to go online and look at our website where there's lots more information, particularly around our first outdoor experiment, which is called Rethickening Arctic Sea Ice, which started about 3 weeks ago. And I'm happy to take any further questions in the moderated discussion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you indeed. Perhaps Andy, do you want to go next?
Happily, yeah. Thanks, Matthias. Thanks for organising this and the invitation. So yeah, I'm the founder of a non-profit organisation called the Degrees Initiative, and we run the largest SRM research programme in the world, supporting researchers from low and middle income countries to do their own SRM research, ask their own questions, make their own minds up, and ultimately to play a central role in global attempts to understand whether SRM could be useful or harmful, good or bad idea. I will, like Mark, cover the why, what, and how, and I'm going to throw in a bonus "so what" section at the end, the implications of the why, what, and how. Why? We support SRM research in low and middle income countries because it is the essential foundation for equitable and evidence-based decision making about SRM in the future. We don't support research because science is going to give us all the answers. Sadly, it's not that easy, but research builds experts, and then with the right support, experts get out of the lab and they go and they do good things. They lead critical conversations with stakeholders, they inform policymakers, and they support the governance conversation that Mark alluded to. And so that's why we support research, because it changes the entire global environment in which SRM is going to be evaluated, ensuring informed and confident representation from the countries that will be most affected, whether we decide to use or to reject SRM. Regarding the what, in terms of how it works, we support teams of researchers across the global south, and they're in the physical and the social sciences, and they are free to define their own research questions and methods and to explore how SRM could affect their regions. We don't commission research, so we don't approach teams and ask them to research a particular climate impact in their region. We run open calls for proposals, and then grant decisions are made by independent committees of experts, informed by independent expert peer review. And that process means that neither I nor my colleagues get to choose which teams get grants, which teams get expansion or continuation grants, and there is a firewall between us and the Southern researchers to ensure and demonstrate their intellectual independence. And then we provide funds for the Southern teams to meet with each other, to attend conferences, to publish in open access journals, and in so doing, to build a global community, the kind of connected global community that we're going to need as a foundation for the other conversations on governance and experiments and so on. In terms of the so what, we're in a luxurious position. It's 8 years since we launched our first modelling grants, and so we're to some extent able to demonstrate our theory of change. We now support over 150 researchers across 36 research programs in 25 low and middle income countries, and the basic stats show the necessity of this work. These 36 projects, they represent the first SRM research of any kind in South America, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in LDCs, least developed countries, and in small island developing states. None of these regions or blocks had SRM research before teams first applied for degrees grants. And it's awesome to see. It means we support a team in Pakistan, for instance, who are exploring how SRM might affect malaria transmission in South Asia. Great paper came out in the last week from a team of economists in Mexico looking at the economic dimensions of SRM and the potential risks of termination shock. And we support a team in Nigeria, paper out in the last year, looking at how SRM could affect agriculture in the region. And so this is the theory of change in action. Our researchers are getting out of the lab, they're leaving their university campuses, and they are changing how the world looks at SRM. So more than a third of the teams who came into SRM research with degrees funding have gone on to receive support from other sources, including from ARIA and from EDF, providing grants to do things that degrees could never have covered. In the last year, a collection of researchers who came into SRM research 8 years ago in Africa, they've banded together to form the African Climate Intervention Research Hub, which is now funded independent of degrees and is supporting research across the continent. Our colleagues in Mexico put together an executive education course to allow people to expand the consideration of SRM beyond university campuses. And when the World Climate Research Programme put together a lighthouse study to look specifically at SRM, all of the southern researchers to join that expert group first came into SRM research through degrees grants. And so that's the so what. This is not just about research, although research is the foundation for making good decisions. But our approach is to use research to build expertise, and then expertise is about governance, and it's about transfer of power from north to south, and it's ultimately about evidence and equity. So I'll leave it with that and look forward to further discussions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. And last but not least, over to you, Lisa.
Super. Yeah, it's always tough to follow two other great speakers. Great to see you all today. So as Matthias mentioned, I'm from Environmental Defense Fund. So we're a nonprofit that's been around about 57 years. So we're in the environment. We're an environmental NGO. SRM is not our only thing we do. We've been around doing things on air quality, climate change in general. We work in the oceans on fisheries, whole range of things. So you might say, well, why, why for us, why is EDF getting into this? And as Matthias mentioned, we've been involved in this in a governance sense for about 15 years. And indeed, we're proud to say we're one of the leaders of the early version of degrees a long time ago, or the organization that eventually morphed into degrees. So we can't claim credit for degrees now, but we think of us, I think of ourselves as the sort of the grandparents maybe, or something like that. Very just so happy to see all the work that's gone on that's been discussed. So the why of why is EDF getting involved in research now? We took a look at the landscape, like others have said when they looked at the landscape, and this conversation over SRM is only heating up, as it will. I mean, as the world continues um, to grow, the temperature continues to increase, and the discussion is evident more and more and more countries about whether or not SRM might be a technique to consider. We felt that it was very important to start to jump into the research space with our sort of why was about gaps, filling gaps, trying to fill information on the ground that we think is going to be important for decision makers in the future. I just should say right up front that our policy or our position statement on SRM right now is we do not think it should be deployed. That's our position right now, in terms of not having enough information, maybe not, there's no governance, there's a whole bunch of reasons. We don't put any reasons, don't quote me on the reasons, but we're not in favor of deployment at this time, but we definitely are in favor of doing research on this. And so in this world, it's actually a little bit controversial even to say that we think we should research this. So that's been also part of our program, is to advance, just to advocate for research to be done in general, not only to actually fund the research, which we are. So the why is about providing information, and the gap that we saw when we looked at the landscape of what was already being done is we felt that we started off with a systematic literature review in the area of impacts, um, and I also, my colleague and I were both on an academy committee that surveyed the landscape in the United States. So this was a narrow slice of the world, but um, the research out there in the literature, as of a couple of years ago anyway, was very sparse on impacts that mattered sort of at the local and regional scale. So things like health impacts, ecosystem impacts, agriculture work even. So there was some research, but compared to like the findings that, for example, we know global temperatures are going to cool. I mean, the models are very clear about that. But what will happen at more of a regional level? And there was also a dearth of work that was not modeling. So as Andy mentioned, I mean, Degrees has been fantastic in this space doing impacts research. I mean, a lot of the research is impacts, but it's often modeling based around the world. So we thought that there was an opportunity to fund work in the impact space, especially work that where we might learn from data, from analogs. So we're taking the tack in our program right now of looking at the gaps, what is not there's not as much information on, and trying to see how we can bring empirical data from using analogs such as volcanoes, wildfire smoke, other types of ways to look at the possible impacts of SRM through the use of data and historical data sets. Um, we have focused another piece of our story is we focused on SAI, so stratospheric aerosol injection was a choice as well, because we feel that that's the most developed, sort of technically probably the most controversial in some ways because it's a global technique that's been suggested. So we felt like that might be we have limited funds. We thought that's a place to probably focus and be able to make a difference in putting forward additional information. Another part of the why was supporting decision makers in the future, like supporting decisions in the future. We're not just a basic science program. We can't just fund anything that might be interesting about SRM. We wanted to really try to fund research that we think will be needed and will be what people are asking about if the world does decide at some point to consider this technique seriously. So impacts, things that matter on the ground like water supply, ecosystems, agriculture, etc. So that's sort of a little bit of the why. The what is that we started off with a workshop of experts to look at that kind of space and say, what would be of interest? How could we focus this down? What would be the interesting questions? So we had a workshop. We then issued an RFP that was open call, had a stage where we had letters of intent so people could sort of put in like their ideas. We screened those letters for relevance, are they relevant to the call? We then invited full proposals, had peer review, and we selected 9 projects in the end. That we've just kicked off their funding. In fact, just had their PI meeting. What is today? Tuesday. So yeah, we just had their PI meeting yesterday. Um, so let's see. So the what is projects that range from looking at the analogs like wildfire smoke, like the big Australian fires that happened several years ago. How did those smoke from those fires affect um, agriculture, other impacts on the ground? Looking at past data sets, looking at volcanoes, not only Pinatubo, but some of the other volcanoes that have occurred to see, is there a signal there? What can we learn about those volcanoes? We have also people evaluating whether this analog approach is even going to be valuable or not. So does this even work? And in how and what the limitations might be. Work on looking at light, especially the role of diffuse or changes in radiation, and how important is changes in light to things like agriculture. So I see I'm over my time, so I just wanted to I think I've covered all the 3 things, but we are just starting off these projects, and we'll have more information after they get going and after they are hopefully producing some results. But that's a little story in a nutshell for us. So thanks, Matthias.
Fantastic. So thank you all three. I think already from those brief remarks, one thing becomes clear. This is, engaging in research on this issue, as probably with almost any other issue, is a journey. It's not like a one-off engagement. Okay, we'll look at this issue and then we know what needs to be done, but rather it's a continuing process, both for those involved in the research and for broader publics. And a commonality I think I'm hearing is a focus to inform and not predetermine public policy choices that are ultimately in the hands of policymakers, decision makers in the public realm, and of course publics to make up their minds around that as well. And so a focus on empowering discussion. And I think the three of you have shown, one can deliberately, or one has to deliberately place a focus on specific aspects, either in terms of process or setting up activities, a focus on various geographies, or building capacity in various parts of society, or on specific topics, specific open questions. And that is a choice that is obviously in the hands of a research funder. And there's diversity there, I think is an interesting and relevant recognition, which sometimes I feel gets lost when we talk about principles in a generalized manner that apply globally. But enough editorializing from me. We are, I think, ready to enter the broader conversation. And on the next slide, we have just a few guidelines, just to illustrate guidelines can be useful to organize activities in a group. And ultimately, Co-Create will produce some guidelines as a project for SRM research. Our guidelines for this discussion are that we actively listen, and rather than confront views, we try to engage with the different views, try to be concise, focused, moving the conversation forward, and we channel kindness in doing so. With that, I would already invite participants to raise their hand to either phrase a question in the chat or to phrase the question verbally, and then we'll direct it for the conversation. I see Dana. I think your hand went up right away, so please come in.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias, and hello to everybody. And thank you to the speakers for presenting their funding initiatives. However, the title of this event today is also how to fund or how to do research responsibly. And so it's, I think, very important to discuss and to reflect what kind of research and what are the rules and the governance framework. And well, it is to be said that we have to refer to the CBD moratorium, which says small-scale experiments should be conducted in controlled conditions and prior assessment and so on. I think most of us know the text, and I think it's important under such a title, how to do research responsibly, to refer to those rules and to refer to states. What are the rules states should control and ensure before research can happen? And so I think this is a very important governance conversation. And I think we should also discuss the American Geophysical Union principles. Yes, and one other thing is, so far it is the proposition was from the speakers. Of course, they had only a short input time, that more research is always a good thing. But of course, we know examples where research enables dangerous techniques that may cause negative or disastrous results. And this has to be said. So it's not, the solution is not more research and more research. Maybe we should, of course, restrict also research. And we should also discuss who should finance or not finance research. And yeah, soon.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Dana. So there's a few elements in there. I would suggest perhaps to focus on the last bit, which if I'm to word it as a pointed question, for example, as a suggestion, perhaps, how can research funders or decision makers more broadly ensure that the research is advancing knowledge in a manner that supports decisions at the political level in the end, rather than leads to a use of a technology or a development of a technology that is against the public interest? Can such distinctions be made, and if where are the challenges, or how have we so far experienced this? I would say this is a tricky issue because technologies, the hardware might already exist, right? So when it comes to determining how knowledge acts in the world, that's a tricky concept there. But I don't know if there are any takers from our three guests.
I could start.
Go
I
ahead.
know
Yeah.
that there's great questions there, and I kind of also heard some other questions, Matthias, if I can also address some parts of Dana's question. The I forgot to mention, I mean, I think one of the important principles for research in this area is transparency. And that's something that we are implementing for ourselves. The way we are implementing that is to list the funders on our website, list the projects on the website. We're, of course, not dealing with experiments ourselves. In our program, we're dealing with more, data, past data. So we don't have the issue of what you were saying about like experiments in the field. I actually think it's a really important question about whether doing research does that lead immediately down the road to like a deployment. And our sense, grapple with this a lot, but we think they are separable because we know of other examples where people do research, or in the past, programs have had research, and it has been a separate consideration whether or not society wants to go ahead and make a decision or use a technology. Our advocacy around this is solely around research. Completely agree with the premise, though, that this, you know, I mean, we all have said it, we think research should be supporting decision making in the future. But, whether that leads to a good decision or the right decision or whatever the decision is completely a separate question. And so I think it is important to understand that. I personally, we don't think that it actually leads to a particular decision like deploy, not deploy, that kind of thing. Our our premise going in, or our kind of operating assumption, is that information in this case is a good because there's a lack of information, and so the more information people can have, that actually serves the common interest of people being able to make a better decision because they know more. But that is a kind of an assumption. Like, I think it's good you're kind of interrogating that assumption off the bat. So. And I guess the other thing that we've talked about, you mentioned moratoria, like the discussions that we've had and seen in other fora are, um, you know, the norms that research programs put out themselves are important, and it's why we have on our website, in our way we speak about this, we always talk about the mitigation is job number one. This doesn't replace mitigation. This is no substitute for mitigating emissions. That's always, I didn't say that today. I suppose I should have said that today, but that's always when I talk about this as a big research, as a big topic, that's always my first sentence. It's my closing sentence. And that this is sort of this is not a substitute, but we also feel we can't bury our heads in the sand. We feel that this is something that has to be engaged, and indeed, like, providing and allowing people access to information is a democratizing force rather than just only having people, in very small little rooms talking about it. So anyway, that's kind of just a few thoughts I had on your question, but I'm sure that we could talk for a few hours about this. So thank you for the good question.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think I saw Andy early on also wanting to respond, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, great points, Lisa, and great questions, Dana. Brought up a lot of important considerations. I agree with you entirely that the call for research into SRM should not be taken as a call for all research, any kind, anyhow, anytime. But I think the consideration of the Convention on Biological Diversity decisions is important here, and I would refer to decision 1314, the one that often gets overlooked. This was a decision taken 3 COPs after decision X33, the ban on certain geoengineering activities. And decision 1314.5 is pretty unambiguous. The parties to the CBD, which is all of the world's governments bar the Vatican and the United States, agreed that more transdisciplinary research is needed to make informed decisions about SRM. So there is a near global agreement on the need for SRM research. What's less convincing to me is the idea that Lisa picked up on, that if you do the research, then you're taking a step onto a slippery slope, and before you know it, small research is big research is use, and use is bad. I'd refer to 2 different geoengineering technologies in support of the idea that the slippery slope is not that slippery or not there at all. When I started working on this topic in 2008, when I was a policy advisor at the Royal Society, and back then, ocean iron fertilization was the big thing. Give me half a tanker of iron and I will give you an ice age, said someone, James Martin, I think, half in jest, but that was the grandiose claim about ocean iron fertilization. And then people went out and they tested it. People went out to the Southern Ocean and experiments were done of a decent scale. And those experiments found that ocean fertilization appeared more risky, less certain, less effective than had been implied by some of the bombast around this in 2007, 2008. And as a result, it's not disappeared correctly, but ocean fertilization disappeared down the research agenda. It's not the case that the moment you research something and it has potential utility, that it's rushed through to deployment. The same goes for brightening the surface of the planet. That was a much more seriously considered SRM approach in 2008. And it's got huge advantages over stratospheric aerosol injection because it doesn't involve putting chemicals into the environment. We could do it today. Take some white paint outside, paint your drive, and you are cooling the planet, albeit a very small amount. And again, science was done on this. People did modeling studies, and they found that even if you could whiten enough of the built environment to make a difference to global temperatures, it would be a horrible idea because you'd be doing patchy spots of cooling in different parts of the planet, and that would monkey around with weather patterns, and it looks all round like a bad idea. And again, that has caused it to slip down the policy ladder, the order of policy importance, despite the fact it would be something that'd be relatively easy to do. So I would question the idea of the slippery slope, and while agreeing that not all research is good research, but there's plenty of transparent, useful, responsible research we can do, particularly in the global south, to inform governments as to whether this may be a good or a bad idea.
Thank you, Andy. Mark, did you also want to answer or on this, or did you have something else? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you for your questions, Dana. I won't repeat what Andy and Lisa have said, but I'll just come in and answer your question around what responsible research might look like. So we're trying to figure this out now in the Exploring Climate Cooling program, and some of the measures that we've instituted to try and make research responsible, particularly around these outdoor experiments, which I think is where the slippery slope argument really, has its sharp end, as it were, include predefining before the experiment what the aims of that experiment are. So the value of the knowledge gained has to outweigh the hassle of going through the experiment. But also mandating things around technically the experiment. How does it happen? How big is it? How long does it last? Are the effects reversible? There are things that you can do to make those experiments safe by design and make them conform technically to certain rules. And then we think about sort of the wider societal impact of those experiments. So, for example, mandating that the communities near where the experiment take place are consulted and that they actually have a real option to help co-design the experiment or to refuse permission for the experiment if they're really not happy. Mandating that if the experiment is happening in indigenous territory, that it has the free, prior, and informed consent of those indigenous communities, mandating that there are environmental impact assessments that happen before the experiment takes place and that they're made available for the community to comment on and to suggest alterations to the experiment in light of that. And also through measures that I think funders can put in place to maintain sort of a level of independent oversight. So we, for example, have an independent oversight committee that scrutinizes things that we want to do, particularly the outdoor experiments, and makes independent recommendations on whether or not they receive funding. So those are just some of the ways that we're working towards responsible research. And everything that is out there on our website, and it's basically also a call for feedback. So if you can see ways that we could be being more responsible in the way that we go about things, please do write in and let us know.
Thank you, Mark, as well. So I'll go in the order that I saw hands go up. I think Martin Wolf was next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Lisa and Mark and Andy for the great overview. I was really struck by some of the differences in deciding how to select funding recipients. I noticed that some orgs like Degrees are totally hands-off and rely on, very independent reviewers and review processes. Other organizations like the nonprofit I work for, we don't fund SRM research, but we fund other intervention research, and we're a bit more hands-on. And maybe it sounds like EDF kind of takes a bit more of a middle of the ground approach. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of each approach and kind of striking a balance between how to get the answers to questions that you feel are urgently needed while, avoiding being viewed as trying to steer the field towards researching certain things. Thanks.
Sure, I can. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Matthias.
Jump right in.
Yeah, great question, Martin. Great to see you. Yes, ours is a combination. We had scientific merit. So we had two criteria, basically, scientific merit and relevance to the program. So, yeah, Andy and I have spoken, like, how he describes his program, like the Degrees, it's like they have a completely independent, separate committee, like, he and others are not involved in it at all. In our decision making, we follow sort of the model, I would say, like a long time ago in ancient history, I was a program manager in a federal government agency, funding research. And I would say it's sort of similar to that, where there's a screening for scientific merit. That's like the projects have to be good science, that is like the number one criterion. But then they also need to be relevant to the call. And that relevance is screened by people in the EDF program. So it's true that it's like a that's where the ton of, like, I guess we like have more of a weight on the relevance. Is this relevant? Like we as I mentioned are trying to do work that's like exploring the value of analogs in this space, like so that we can use existing data as much as possible. We're not having to go out and do experiments. We're kind of using like, well, what do we already know about how analogs for SRM might work in the real world, and like let's look at the data to show us and the pros and cons and limitations. So it's true. We had sort of those main two criteria, relevance and merit, scientific merit, and the relevance is something that we weigh in on. And ultimately, I made the decision as the program manager, for what was funded based on the input and the scientific merit and the panels and the reviews and things that we had. So.
Very interesting indeed. Yeah, great question. Did anyone else want to weigh in on this? Yeah, Marcus, I think you were a bit faster.
Thanks, Matthias. Yeah, I'll say a few things about ARIA's selection process because I realised I didn't talk about that at all. So ARIA we're a UK government funding agency, for those of you that didn't know. So all our money comes from the UK taxpayer. So this puts some certain requirements on how we review. So we make use of expert peer review in two separate stages, and Matthias and Andy can actually talk about this because we're funding both CFG and Degrees through the program. And we assess based on fit to call. So there is a call that is specifically bounded, and also on the excellence of that proposal, whether the proposal is in science or social science. And we go through a whole round of interviews, and we also select people based on how we think they will gel with the other people that we're funding through this consolidated program. So the idea is that we produce a cohort of researchers who can support each other and who cover the whole range of activities that we think are relevant to the call.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, Martin, my life would be so much easier if 8 years ago Degrees had decided to just commission research. If we'd gone to the University of Sao Paulo and said, you guys are doing great research on climate in the Amazon, here's 100,000. Would you look at SRM and climate and the Amazon? And that would have cut out so much work for us, because organizing worldwide calls for proposals, coordinating volunteers who generously give their time to review the 75 proposals that came in, review committee decisions. This is the very much the slow road to get from A to B. We decided, and I think it was right, we decided that it was the right road to take for us, though, because we are a northern-based NGO working on a topic of extreme controversy. And so for us, wanting to support Southern scientists to do their own research, make their own minds up, and take their position in the debate, intellectual integrity was absolutely essential. And so for us, that came from having the firewall between staff and grants decisions and allowing the Southern scientists to research whatever they considered to be most important. And I think it's worked out great. Had we decided that we wanted to just look at extreme rainfall across the world, there were quicker ways to get there. But we're not the right people to judge whether extreme rainfall is the main climate threat in Southern Africa and Malaysia and Brazil.
Thanks, all. Yeah, I think those are very illustrative answers. That's a really good question. I think Herman Rustenberg was next.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. I have a concern. And that is most of the programs that fund SRM research, they fund the governance, the impacts, some more on the cautious side, and they fund less on the actual technology development or field trials. That's a more difficult side to get funding for. And I understand this approach because it's an area you really want to understand what you're doing. At the same time, we now see upcoming Stardust. So private enterprises who invest lots of money, 70 million or so, into the technology development. And that's a risk that I see, that because if the private companies are taking over, governments lose control. And you can see this development in the EU. They're very cautious in their point of view of how to deal with SRM research, but the private investors are taking over now. So in my view, this would mean that let's say the governmental funding should step up. They should take this leading role also in the technology development, which is not happening. So I would like to hear your opinion on this, how to deal with this. Because it's really a concern I have that the for-profit organizations are taking the lead in this, and that would be a bad development. How do you see this?
I'll just say really quickly that
Mhm.
sorry, I'm sorry. I think I'm that kid in class who's always jumping in early. I'm sorry.
Love it.
I just say, I'll let others speak about this. I mean, ARIA is actually a very big, I think it's the biggest publicly funded program in the world on this topic. So, and probably I think a little bit more than Stardust. I don't know all of the money that they have, but our part of our advocacy and our policy, in our policy work on this topic is we do advocate strongly for publicly funded research. We think that the governments absolutely do need to step up, and this should be something that's publicly funded. I'll just state, as a nonprofit, our research in this is not publicly funded. I mean, our research, our funding does come from foundations and individuals. So we are not receiving government money, and we advocate for government money though to go much more into this space. We think that's a much better route for the world to be having the accountability that comes with government money. But it's not happening as much as it should be. So I totally agree. But I mean, I think ARIA is a good sign that the UK government is putting in money in that scale.
Thanks. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you for your question, Herman. I agree with you is what I'd say on that regard. Australian government have also put money into marine cloud brightening research through the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Programme. So the UK government isn't alone, but I think we're the only government that's put money into sort of a coherent programme around different types of SRM in quite this way. And all I'll say is that I hope that other governments will join areas. We're sort of kind of in that space alone at the moment, but we don't want to be alone in that space. We want other governments to come on board. And this is part of the reason that we decided that we would fund projects outside of the UK as well. So teams from across the world, because we want this to be an international endeavor that's conducted collaboratively.
Okay, thank you.
Andy, did you also?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Royal Society report I worked on in 2009 concluded that SRM is the only known way to quickly stop warming or cool the planet down. That conclusion was reached by the US National Academy of Sciences in whenever it was 2016. It was reaffirmed by the UNEP One Atmosphere report. I would be surprised if anyone on this call thinks that we are in a good state with global warming, that we're going to cruise below 1.5 C. So we're in a deep hole. It looks like the impacts could be really nasty. SRM is the only known way to quickly stop or reverse warming. In this situation, you would think that there would be enormous global research programs. You think there'd be collaborative research, there'd be attention paid to governance. How are we ever going to make good decisions? Because on the flip side of things, SRM could be utterly catastrophic. The stakes are incredibly high, and I would expect that governments around the world would be clubbing together to try and understand this and work out governance and what decision making looks like. And it's not happening. And to me, that is extremely concerning. I've tried to sidle past the thing about tech development because we don't have anything to do with that. But in terms of just researching what SRM might mean for climate, I think it's a staggering state of affairs, and we are lucky that NGOs and foundations have been taking it up. Lucky still that ARI is coming.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, a pointed question, and one that can be discussed controversially, but for me, the bottom line as well is about who's involved and on which premises, and how are decisions made at the end of the day. And also, again, I think Andy outlining the state of affairs is an important context to all these questions, indeed. So I think I'll move on to Kate Scott, who had her hand up earlier.
Hi, thank you. Yep, I'm from the climate science team within UK government. I had a couple of questions. One was on transparency. A lot of the people say, oh, we're transparent, we put our projects up on our website. And I guess my question is, but what is the aim of that transparency? So what if we have a list of projects on a website, for example? Is it to build trust? Is it to enable stakeholders to scrutinize these projects? So that's kind of fundamental underlying question for me around transparency. And then my second question, if I can take the liberty, is more for reflections. Are voluntary frameworks for sort of responsible and ethical research governance on SRM, like the AGU principles out there, adequate, do you find, to address the risks of SRM research? And were you able to adopt and operationalize any for your research, or were there any significant challenges in doing so? Thank you.
Great. So the what for on transparency. Mark, were you about to start?
I was, if that's okay. I'm just
Yeah.
checking I can jump in before Lisa. On the transparency piece, both of what you said, Kate, are aims here. So yes, transparency to educate and so that people know what we're doing. Yes, transparency to build trust. Yes, transparency so that folks can scrutinize what we're doing, tell us if we're doing something wrong, and how we might improve. Also, so that people just generally know where their money is going and what it's being used for. So the aim of the transparency here is to build the general conversation on the level of education. And also there are sometimes specific communities that we're wishing to target with that. For example, they might be communities in the Arctic that live near the communities where these are taking place that might one day be affected. You then asked around sort of these voluntary research guidelines. Are they sufficient? Well, obviously not. Because they're voluntary. We did build off things such as the Oxford principles and the AGU principles, and we tried, as we say, to operationalize them in the way that we went about funding our research, I think we're in pretty decent alignment with those principles. And when you think that, in a way, you can kind of imagine that we're sort of the practice to the theory that those frameworks set out. But again, I'm not suggesting that everything that ARIA does here is perfect. These are, we're running effectively experiments in governance of the experiments at the same time as we're running the experiments themselves. And we would welcome sort of further international collaboration around what proper frameworks for research might look like and how we can adopt, common standards for how those experiments should be done and how they should be reported.
Great. Oh yeah, Andy, please go ahead as well.
Yeah, great questions, Kate. These are some of the most important issues. Transparency, I'll just raise one of the issues that we've touched on but not fully engaged with yet. One of my main concerns about private companies leading on SRM research is that they've got this fundamental tension where if they believe that they can design a process or a particle or what have you that they think you can patent and you can monetize, there is an incentive to have a lack of transparency, to hide what you've designed because it's the main thing that you want to sell in the future. And so I find that things are pulling in opposite directions there. This generally agreed need for transparency clashes with the business imperative, and that's concerning. On what we can achieve with voluntary measures, I mean, I think that there's a lot can be achieved. There's no one that compelled Degrees initiative, for instance, to make sure that all of the team's research goes into open access journals, so it's not hidden behind a paywall, so that Southern stakeholders can read what they say. I think a lot has been achieved with voluntary measures. Where it obviously gets difficult is on risky forms of research. So not computer modeling, not desk studies, but once things are done out in the environment, we've not had to deal with that. Mark and Aria are doing a very responsible job by thinking through what serious engagement looks like and so on. But I think that's where the voluntary measures start to creak a bit.
Thank you very much.
Were the questions answered, Kate?
Yes, completely. Yeah, very happy with that. It's just as well, the last one was more reflections. How easy can we operationalize those? So yeah, thank you.
I'll just say ditto to what other folks said, and EDF did have this conversation, before we started our program. We had a workshop on like governance and what principles could we take. I think the AGU principles are excellent, but they're difficult because there's so much there. It's like trying to boil it down to what do you actually do in your program? What do you actually, what does this mean for a researcher? What does this mean for us? It's just about being transparent with the funding is really important. Being transparent about what is done along the lines too of what Mark said about just so people know what's happening. There's just that baseline is already, I think, better than like the other, which is like, people just don't know it's all happening out of sight. No one can see what's happening. So that's part of it for us, but ditto to a lot of us.
Yeah, and I think also for the Co-Create project context, this question of voluntary versus binding is of course very central, and it's quite a challenge to figure out what can be done towards that broadening. And also, I mean, clearly a research funder as an actor, be it a public agency or a private actor, has a disproportionate opportunity to actually shape that reality by conducting themselves in a particular way. So I think these are all great illustrations of that power. Yeah, I think that certainly speaks to the previous point as well about public or private actors engaging and who should be engaging. I saw Pietro Andreoni, please.
Yeah, thanks. This was very interesting. I think it's just a follow-up, I guess, on this theme of the private actors entering the SRM conversation, because I think in the past, the SRM research world was not a crowded one in a sense, and all the actors that were involved, in my opinion at least, were responsible actors. They might have been biased actors, like the individual, but they were responsible actors, as in scientists essentially. Now, of course, the things might be changing. So question number one is, do you think that Stardust is the exception? So it's like an idea that someone had and then it will not work. And then in 5 years, the research landscape will kind of look like what it is now. So a little bit of public funding, universities, and et cetera, et cetera. Or do you think this is like the beginning of a new era for SRM research? And if the latter case, how do you think, from the perspective of funders and like at least people who want to be responsible funders, how does it change? Not that I don't trust you to be, but of course, like everything is imperfect in this world, like striving towards responsible research, how does it change once you have these type of actors that come in? So for example, do you see the role of ARIA in the next 10 years to be the debunker of if there is 3 new companies and each one of them proposes a new compound, for example, and they will all say that the compound is perfectly safe, then is the role of the public sector going to be saying, okay, is this really safe? Maybe not, and then study like this sort of like action, reaction, and proactive type of research, which I think might change a lot now that private actors are in the game.
Interesting question indeed. Andy, yes, please.
Yeah, this is really tough stuff, Pietro. I guess it's my hope that private actors are going to be a flash in the pan with in SRM research, that they're going to rise and people realize that there doesn't look like there's a lot of profit to be made in this field. This isn't like other novel technologies where if you can design the widget that everyone then uses across the world, then the market can just keep scaling and scaling. There's a very clear cap to the size of the market for SRM in terms of, people are talking a few $1 billion per year to deploy a system. That's not a huge market if you're a venture capitalist looking for the next big thing. So that's a hope for me. What does concern me though is that the entry of private companies looking to profit from SRM means there are actors out there whose business models depend on SRM being used. And that's a change of incentive that we hadn't seen before, where it was just academics wanting to understand, does this work? What are the side effects? How would you do it? So that's a fundamental change of incentive. To counter that is the observation that that's not an unusual situation. Whether you're looking at solar power or nuclear or whatever, there are always actors who are looking to deploy the technology to make money. That doesn't mean that they get their way. And I hope that remains the case with SRM. But I have to say that the entry of private actors makes me nervous.
Can I just add really quickly too to the excellent points you're making that I've had this discussion as well with some of the private entities themselves, at various meetings, and their statement is, well, I mean, and we hear this in other realms, that private companies exist for all kinds of things in the world, like almost everything that we use as people is produced by private companies in some ways. And their claim is, they're looking for regulation from the government side. They talk about analogies like an FDA in the States. That's like a government agency that regulates private companies who want to sell their drugs for human health on the market, and there's this process. But the concern is, of course, that nothing exists for that in this space. There is no global regulatory system built by a democratic government or a group of governments, or there is nothing in place that is the gatekeeper, if you will, for whether a private company can go forward. And so I go forward to actually, as Andy said, to realize their profit or to kind of get used by some other country. There's just not the companion governmental constraints. I know we're well beyond the issue of research here in this comment, but I think that is a gap that is underappreciated now. Like I talk about transparency all the time, and like that's one of my concerns with the private companies. But right now, the private companies are saying, well, we're private companies. There's private companies everywhere. Why are you singling us out? Or if you have a problem, we should have regulatory regimes to constrain what we do, that kind of thing. So I think we're in just a very, it's kind of like I would say in the States, the Wild West, Wild West situation where there's actors out there without a lot of governance at all, like any governance. And so it's an issue and kind of well beyond this issue. I think actually the university community, the NGO community that are engaged with the AGU principles and these kinds of principles are actually, we have our problems, but we're kind of at least trying to be having some governance rules and so forth. The other sectors are just not. It's not clear how they're adopting these principles and so forth, and that is a missing component in the space. If there should be a global regime to regulate research, if there should be a global regime to regulate governance of deployment, that kind of thing, all of that is missing. There is no FDA for this in the world. So anyway, just to say that's what if the private sector were here, that's probably what they would say, is that, well, we look for regulation from the government. And of course, we all know that's not happening, right?
Thank you. Great contributions. Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think Stardust are the first private actor in this space, but I'm not as sure as Andy that they'll be the last. And there seems to be a pattern in all technology development where the technology develops and then how it's used and the rules that go around it, what we might call governance, is kind of an afterthought. And part of the goal of I guess what all three of our organizations is doing is trying to get ahead of that in sort of the public and public good sphere, so that we have this body of information that we can share with the world at large, so that regulation can try and keep up with these private actors, with their motivations to deploy in the shorter term, and so that we're not caught out as we have been in the past with some other technologies.
Brilliant. Yeah, indeed. I think this question also connects with one of the previous ones. And for me, it points to the potential role of a healthy research ecosystem also in providing knowledge checks and balances in some sense, so that at the very least, exaggerated claims get called out on or are actually easily debunked by a strong and diverse, understanding of the issue, so that quick and stupid decisions also won't be made, perhaps by politicians at the end of the day. So even legitimately representing actors can, behave foolishly, and therefore, I think that's a part of this equation as well. That in an ideal world, decisions are based on a very robust understanding, and so it's not an easy issue to address for sure. But we're moving quickly towards the end of our seminar, and I would perhaps, in the absence of further hands, ask a closing question, which is, steering towards the central objective of the Co-Create project, being, partly to inform the decisions in the EU with regard to the European research area, decisions also perhaps by member states and public actors included. Given all this, and given your experiences in contributing to this research field and area, what would you recommend to a public policy decision maker, be it a research funder or someone who is actually setting the boundaries, regulating this issue? Is there something you would like to share that hasn't been expressed yet?
I can have a go, Matthias. I guess the point I would want to make is that there's still so much low-hanging fruit to be gathered in SRM research. So people quickly and reasonably want to jump to the hardest points. So how do we manage large-scale open-air research that may have transboundary implications? Because that's a thorny issue, and it's intellectually fascinating, but there's just so much useful stuff we can do way before that point. So we don't know nearly enough to make informed decisions about how SRM would affect health globally, the extra particles in the lungs versus the change in direct sunlight and so on. We need to understand that better to make informed decisions. And the same goes for biodiversity and agriculture and so on. We just don't know enough to make informed decisions now, and I challenge anyone to say otherwise. Plus, if we are ever going to get to a stage where the world wants to make informed and equitable decisions, we are going to need connections and community and people who know each other and can discuss this based on evidence, not based on intuition or supposition. And to do that is going to take long, slow, boring, hard work of connecting research projects, of organizing workshops, of going to see your colleagues in other parts of the world, seeing how you see the world differently, and co-designing research agendas. This is all relatively low-hanging fruit that doesn't involve the risks or the controversies. And so I'd encourage anyone to start on the low-hanging fruit, and by developing these research programs, you develop a mechanism for starting to address some of the harder issues in time.
Thank you. Herman, yeah, feel free.
Can I respond to the low-hanging fruit a bit? Because I agree, there's low-hanging fruit, and if it's low enough, you can harvest it. At the same time, the higher hanging fruit takes a lot more time to develop, right? And so the technology itself needs more time for development, and also the larger field trials need more time for preparation and development. And we don't have so much time anymore, because climate change itself will continue, right? And it's even accelerating. So I would say don't wait, don't do the low-hanging fruit first, but do everything at the same time, work in parallel. So also invest in the difficult stuff and field trials and technology development, because we don't have so much time anymore.
Thanks, Herman. Dana, I suspect there's a contrast here. Please go for it.
Yes, but I think there was some agreement that we would need rules, and that rules are not perfect, not sufficient. Yes. However, there are some useful rules, and I wanted to hint on the fact that there are plurilateral initiatives by states, most of all from the African Union, to have a conversation of states. So researchers should make more propositions. What should be the rules? Because rule makers are sitting there, what is really needed? And there are not many really useful, operationable proposals. And I think, yes, that's why I really hope that you discuss more about rules and what states should decide. Of course, there won't be a worldwide consensus, but I think a plurilateral agreement will be helpful as well. And one proposal might be no patents. And maybe those evil commercial actors, well, discussable, but incentives will change if we talk about patents and what patents are legitimate and not. And yeah, I just hope that this discussion will start more.
Yes, I think we're trying, at least in the Co-Create project. So thanks for that, indeed. Mark and Lisa, did you also want to come in with some final suggestions?
Oh, just to say this has been a wonderful discussion. I agree with that last comment about the patents, but I'm starting to realize like researchers are there's some things that we actually don't control, in this research academic space. And so there needs to be engagement of governments and other mechanisms to put those rules out there and I think norms go a long way. We're trying to work on the norms, how we run our program, how we think others should run their programs for research. But in terms of when you get to companies and patents and like who's going to go forward, there needs to be a stronger basis for the rules themselves, in addition to the norms that we're putting out. So I'll just say that.
Thanks. Yeah, Mark.
All I'll say is thank you, CFG, for organising this. Thank you, everyone, for coming along and listening to us. And I've dropped my email into the chat if you want to reach out and have a further discussion with me, any of you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark. And just to be clear, this is Perspectives and the Co-Create project. CFG is my other.
So sorry.
No worries. Yeah, no, brilliant. I think we did have a really good discussion today, and really fitting with the purpose of the seminar series, so that we can explore the different aspects of research governance as we are here as a project to support that conversation and hopefully support decision makers, be it in regulatory spaces, research funding areas, public, private, and on the researcher side as well, and the broader civil society engagement on this issue. So hopefully there was something useful for everyone who joined us today. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. And I take this also as an opportunity to point to the forthcoming global forum hosted by the Co-Create project at the end of May. You can find information on that on the stakeholder forum, as well as on the Co-Create webpage, which perhaps we can show the last slide where there's a link and a QR code to find all this, if we can get that slide. Otherwise, I think you will be able to find the website easily through a Google search, but it's coming up just now. There we go. So information for the conference, and of course also for forthcoming seminar iterations, which focus on different topics that all hopefully support this conversation in a broader sense. With that, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our 3 guest speakers in particular, but to everyone else who joined the conversation today. Have a nice day.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Matthias.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.